Aloha mai kako. Coming from our nation's capital in Washington, D.C., welcome to my show, Conversations with Kai. Today, it is my distinct privilege to be joined by two special guests, my colleagues in the U.S. House of Representatives, U.S. Representative Mary Sattler Peltola of Alaska and Sharice Davids of Kansas. It's great to see both of you. Thank you so much for joining this conversation as we wrap up the 117th Congress. And something that's unique about all three of us is we are a few members of the United States House of Representatives that represent the indigenous peoples of this country, Native Americans, Native Hawaiians, and Alaska Natives. So why don't you take a moment to introduce yourselves. Mary, why don't we start with you and just tell us about you and your family.
Good morning. Agathunga, Yupigo Mamtrisakmi. My Yupik name is Agathak. My English name is Mary, of course. And I'm a Yupik Eskimo from Bethel. And the real name of Bethel is Place of Many Fish Caches.
Wow.
Yeah.
Sharice?
Hi, Sharice Davids. I represent the Kansas 3rd Congressional District. I got elected in 2018. I have a actually not uncommon background, but maybe it is for Congress. I'm Ho-Chunk from Wisconsin, but my mom was in the Army for 20 years, and she raised me and my brothers by herself. She served in the Army for 20 years, and then worked at the post office for 20 years. So learned a lot about service from her.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Mary, your path here to the U.S. House was probably something you didn't expect. Just a year ago, you had to fill the shoes of, the Dean of the House, longtime member of the Alaska delegation, Congressman Don Young. Tell us about that, and being the first Alaska Native to walk the halls of the U.S. House of Representatives.
Yeah, Congressman Young has been Alaska's congressman my entire life, and it was a real loss when he passed. And it was a shock. I don't know why the passing of an 88-year-old man was a shock to so many people, but it was shocking. And it was a very big field of folks who wanted to fill the seat. There were 48 of us initially. And when I did win the special election, it was a bit of a surprise to me to be the first Alaska Native, because Alaska is full of really distinguished leaders, really influential leaders, and has been for so long. And it's just interesting that it has taken us this long to have an Alaska Native serving us at the federal level.
Mm-hmm. Hawaii and Alaska have a long, strong relationship. Hawaii's probably arguably most important member of Congress in our history was Senator Danny Noy, and he had a close relationship with Senator Ted Stevens, and they really worked together across the aisle to deliver not just for Alaska and for Hawaii, but for the country. So
yes, we have so much in common. Issues with telecom, transportation. We're both in the corner of the map, not reflective at all of where we really are on the globe. Pilot bread, but seriously, we have so many issues that are parallel, and we have such a good working relationship.
I think both you and I, along with maybe a few other members, have one of the longest commutes between our home districts and coming here to Washington, D.C. I know it takes you a lot of hours to get back home. It takes me almost 18 hours to get back to Hawaii. So, yeah, I know how challenging it is, having been in this role now for the last 2 years.
Yeah, it's a long haul, and it is such an honor to represent our states here in this amazing place. And one of the interesting things is in 1924, none of us would have been considered U.S. citizens. And now just a few generations later, here we are representing all of the people in our states from very, very different backgrounds.
Yeah. Sharice, you're the co-chair of the Native Caucus, which the three of us are a part of, along with other members and colleagues of ours here in the House. Talk about that, the role of the Native Caucus, your role co-leading that caucus, and some of the priorities that the caucus advocates for on behalf of all indigenous peoples in this country.
Yeah. Do you mind real quick if I just say something about...
Go for it.
About Mary coming in. So while we're hitting, usually just so you all know, when I'm not with you, I always say representative or or congressman or congresswoman. But when Mary was elected, I just remember feeling like, because, you know, Deb Haaland and I got elected together in 2018, I just remember thinking how amazing it was that I didn't know how long it would take after she abandoned me. No, I'm just kidding. After she got appointed to be the Secretary of Interior, I didn't know how long it would take before we saw another Native woman get elected, and it was just like really exciting and amazing. And then I know we've had the chance to visit a little bit about just what a interesting time in history we're living in, but yeah, you said something that I really connected with about, I didn't realize when I first started running that there had never been a Native woman in Congress. And I don't know what it says, like big picture, but because there are so many like smart, driven, like qualified Native women out there. And so when you were saying that about having not sent an Alaska Native out here before, it really resonated
with you.
Yeah.
And I remember, I don't know if when you were sworn in, there was a moment a few minutes after on the House floor, and I realized the significance of the moment, and I grabbed the two of you and I said, hey, let's go outside and take a picture.
Yeah.
And so we went outside, we took a picture on the Capitol steps. I posted it on my Twitter page. It is the most, like 90,000 likes, like 15,000 retweets.
Wow.
It is the most popular post I've ever had as an elected official, was that picture. And I think it's because it resonated with so many people across the country, the significance of it, that for the first time in the history of our country, in that moment, all of our country's indigenous peoples were represented in the U.S. House of Representatives. And I hope that, kind of feels special to all of us, as it did for me.
That was so powerful, and my kids actually were following that and letting me know the traction on it, because they were really excited about it. And I think it speaks to a couple things. I think it speaks to the strength and ability to adapt that Native people have had over the centuries. And if you think about the concerted effort there was to erase us and really assimilate us, and here we are, and our cultures are still very strong, and we're still very proud to be from those cultures. And I think it also speaks to diversity, the importance of a diversity of ideas, a diversity of genders and cultures, and how important that is for democracy.
Yeah, and I like the diversity of ideas concept, because I do think that not in a way, it almost feels like sometimes not in a way that people can really categorize, like the approach that we take. And I can see it like even just in your first few, time doesn't feel real, so I'm going to say months, first couple months here. It's been a couple of months now.
It has.
That it's kind of like the questions that you're asking, or that I'm asking, or that you're asking, maybe don't always fit really neatly into some box or preconceived notions that people have. And I think that is in part because of the historical aspect, and and then each of our unique backgrounds. So I feel like I sidetracked the conversation. I'm so sorry,
great.
But because I just really wanted to, I don't know, I just really wanted to speak to that.
I don't think there's ever sidetracking a conversation in the Native construct. We're so holistic, and we include everyone in our decisions and the whole community, and kind of no topic is off the table. Yeah.
Well, take a few minutes, because people that are going to be watching this, whether it's in your hometowns or in mine, may not fully understand our different backgrounds. Take a few minutes just to like explain Native American history, Alaska Native history, and I'll do a little bit on Native Hawaiians. Let me
Yeah.
start with you, Sharice.
Well, full disclosure, I'm a lawyer. And it's interesting because when you go to law school, I think they really like it helped me learn how to think through a bunch of stuff in sometimes in a different way than I would have. So I've spent a lot of time learning about particularly the legal history in this country, and it makes a big difference in this job because the federal government has a unique relationship with tribal governments. And so this actually goes to your question you asked that I totally didn't answer, which is maybe not a surprise. People watching, like, oh, she's in Congress, she didn't answer the question. But I feel like one of the things I do as the co-chair of the Native American Caucus is educate particularly our colleagues about what that history looks like and what it means, because tribal governments have a unique relationship with the federal government, and it's one that really is rooted in a number of different things, whether it's treaty rights or the fact that in the Constitution, the Congress, the U.S. Congress, has the primary function for relationships between tribes and governments. And that's a really long history, and we've gone through different eras of approach, which is I feel like, most recently impacted your communities, that Congress really, it's called plenary power. It's just like the overall power for the United States. It's not the executive branch. Like, we decide what the executive branch, like the Congress delegates to the executive branch what needs to happen as it relates to tribes. And it means that we are in an institution where there are so many people who have so much power over what happens with policy and legislation and programs that impact housing and education and healthcare, and the ability to maintain cultural practices. Because there was a time when the federal government didn't allow Native people, Indigenous people here to practice their culture, to practice their spiritual beliefs. And we're now in an era where the federal government recognizes that actually the federal government needs to be making sure that tribes exercise self-determination and exercise sovereignty in a way that's not being pushed down by the federal government. And I mentioned Deb Haaland earlier being the Secretary of the Interior. And one of the things that I think people often are most struck by is that the federal government used to engage with tribes and indigenous people here in what is now the United States through the Department of War. And to now have Deb Haaland as the Secretary of Interior, whose there's a number of functions, but for tribal stuff, the primary function is to make sure that tribes and the federal government are engaging in a good way.
Consultation.
Yeah, and so it is a very complicated history, and I tried to not make it sound that way, but it's a very complicated and long history.
Mary, what about Alaska Natives?
Well, Alaska Natives are about 16% of Alaska's population, and we often still live in a very traditional way, hunting and fishing. One of the things that motivated me to run for Congress is we've seen a real decline in our abundance. And it's to the point now, in terms of salmon and halibut and crab, that I'm concerned not just about allocation among human user groups, I'm concerned about ecosystem collapse, because we just are not seeing the returns getting to the headwaters. It used to be on the river I'm from, for every king salmon that spawned, 6 would come back. And now for every Chinook salmon that spawns, less than 1 come back. So this is a very big concern, and this is a concern felt throughout the state, not just among Alaska Natives, but every user group, and we can all see it just from our own lifetime. But there is still a lot of unmet need in remote parts of Alaska. Many villages, I think between 30 and 40 communities don't have running water. We don't have septic systems in a lot of communities. There are many communities that don't have any Wi-Fi broadband, or in some of the hubs that, like I'm from a large hub, and our region services 30,000 people, but our hub has very spotty internet. I joked with my husband that I would declare candidacy if on that day there was internet in Bethel, because sometimes there are days where we don't have internet. But this is something we see throughout the United States, and it's often not talked about. And so many government agencies say, oh, look us up, look at our website. But there's so much content on the website. Sometimes if you do have broadband, it's hard to load. It takes forever to load. It's hard to navigate. So it's just such an honor to be able to represent Alaskans and be working on these critical issues.
Yeah, being that voice for them.
Yeah.
Sharice, you mentioned something earlier, and I think it is really important, is that one of our roles here is to educate our other colleagues on Native American, Alaska Native, Native Hawaiian issues. So many of our colleagues don't understand our different but sometimes shared histories, the difficult relationships that we've had with the United States of America over the last century or so. For myself, I'm the second Native Hawaiian to represent Hawaii since statehood in 1959, the 7th ever in history to walk the halls of Congress since the annexation of Hawaii to the United States in 1898. But even to today, it's a very divisive, troubled history and issues in Hawaii between Native Hawaiians and the U.S. Native Hawaiians are, by definition, someone who can trace their lineage, their ancestry, to pre-Western contact, which is defined as when Captain Cook arrived in the Hawaiian Islands in 1778.
That's also a commonality between Alaska and Hawaii. Captain Cook was the first to show up near Anchorage, and it's called Cook Inlet.
Yeah. Oh my goodness.
Yeah.
Well,
which really is like not, I mean, one of the things that I think I think people would realize it if they stopped and thought for a minute.
Yeah.
But I think that one of the things that a lot of people really don't necessarily like deeply think about is how recently your states and the United States relationship with the native, with the Native Hawaiians or Alaska Natives, like how really recent that is. Like it's not that many generations, and for the lower 48. And then too, that depends on where, like what part of the United States you're in, how early or late the contact happened, and I think that there's just a general lack of just kind of, I don't want to say recognition, because then it's kind of like people are actively not thinking about it. But I just think it's something that people, because I try to always assume, I try to always assume that there's not malice in people's approach, that people aren't like, I don't care about, your state or your state or, I always try to think about the ways that whatever their experiences led them to have a lack of understanding of this other experience that's happening. And I think that, one of the most important things that we can do is make sure that our colleagues, because of the role that we have as members of Congress, make sure our colleagues really understand that, if it's a fraught relationship that exists, it's not Natives serve in the military at a higher rate than any other group in this country. It's not because we don't love our country. We want the best for everybody in our country, and we want our country to thrive and have abundance and have a sustainable way of existing. And the only way we get there is by actually making sure that we have a deeper understanding of how we got to where we're at right now. And I do think that that's something that having us here speaking with other members of Congress as peers makes such a huge difference, because we're in various meetings, because we are able to
we have a seat at the table. And we can make our voice heard. One of the differences between Native Americans, Alaska Natives, Native Hawaiians is Native Hawaiians don't have federal recognition by the United States of America, and so that we have to creatively legislate different and very important funding mechanisms and policy mechanisms to help Native Hawaiians. Native Hawaiian Health Care Act, VAWA, Native Hawaiian Education Act, the Hawaiian Homes Commission Act, housing, the HASDA. Those are critical programs for Native Hawaiians. And federal recognition is a divisive issue in Hawaii because of Hawaii's history and the illegal overthrow of the Hawaiian Kingdom in 1893, the annexation that happened in 1898 through a joint resolution of Congress, not through a treaty, because the Treaty of Annexation failed twice in the United States Senate from being ratified. And so there's many people in Hawaii still to today that challenge the legality of the United States of America and the Congress to annex Hawaii as a U.S. territory in 1898. It took until 1959 for Hawaii to become a state, right after the 49th state of Alaska. And so it's a troubled history. It's one we're working through. I try to recognize that history, but not, you got to address it, but we also have to move forward.
Well, and I like
for our people.
I like the way you said that, and both of you have a very disarming style about you and engaging. And I think one of the things that's really important for us to do is not be threatening, and because I think there is this irrational concern that we want more than other people. We don't want anything more than anyone else or more than our fair share. We just want an equal share. We want an equal seat at the table. And when we're so holistic, we think of the whole community. We're not just thinking of subgroups like ourselves. So it is important. It's so important that we work with everybody and in a non-threatening way.
Well, let's talk about some priorities. I told you this is going to go by quickly, so we only have a few minutes left. Top priorities for you, maybe one, and of course both of you are coming back to the 118th Congress. I'll miss you. But what are maybe a priority for you, and I'll talk about something that.
So I backfilled Congressman Young's seat, and so I am really championing many of his priorities in this Congress, and I'm sure I will be in future Congresses. He worked for our state for 49 years, but the landless tribes, there are a number of lands bills that Congressman Young was working on. Housing is a very big issue, and like I mentioned earlier, water and sewer, education, those things.
Sharice?
Yeah, so I'm an infrastructure nerd, so I'm always going to be working on that. But I do know that there's some landmark legislation that we worked on. You mentioned the Violence Against Women Act, or VAWA, sometimes people call it, bringing a lot of resources to much needed resources.
By the way, we just passed S7 last night in the House.
Did it pass last night?
Which addresses, an inadvertent error in the bill a few years ago that prevented Native Hawaiian women from getting resources to do that. And
I didn't know that passed last night in the
Congressman
Senate.
Ed Case worked really, really hard yesterday to make sure that that was passed on a voice vote. So thank our colleagues, bipartisan colleagues on the other side of the aisle too, for not calling for a recorded vote.
Yeah. Oh, good. Oh, I'm so glad you told me that. It's a great day. A great news for the beginning of my day.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. And then, like I said, Transportation and Infrastructure Committee. I'm on that. Infrastructure nerd, like. Through and through. Yeah, I got to spend a year at the Department of Transportation as a White House fellow, and I left that experience calling myself a born-again transportation enthusiast. So, you know, we passed the bipartisan infrastructure law. We absolutely, you know, I tried to make sure that we had Native voices at the table in that process. And then, you know, the last thing, because I know we're running short on time, I do want to mention that we're working really hard on the Truth and Healing Commission on Federal Boarding Schools Act. It's a long name.
Yep.
But, you know, the boarding schools issue in the United States is a long, again, complicated history, but we've gotten quite a few co-sponsors on that. I'm hoping that in the next Congress we'll keep that up. That there's a lot of things, you know, there are no tribes there are no federally recognized tribes in the Kansas Third. There are four federally recognized tribes. Say that 3 times real fast. In Kansas, but one of the things our office tries to do, especially as the co-chair of the Native Caucus, is make sure that we're listening and hearing from as many tribes as possible, and other Native folks. So, whoever's watching this, come to our office.
Yeah. You know, my last priority, I'm going to introduce a bill next week called the Hawaiian Homelands Preservation Act, and it will address the Hawaiian Homes Commission Act of 1920 and a very divisive issue called blood quantum that was put into this bill that still to this day affects Native Hawaiians, and I hope to address the blood quantum not just for those lessees that have a lease, but also those that are waiting on the application wait list. So I'm going to introduce it next week, and hopefully it'll live on in the next Congress.
Yeah.
So.
Well, we'll talk about how to work on that.
Well, you know,
in the next Congress.
28 minutes went by super fast.
Yes.
But you know, given the fact this is our final conversation with Kai, I want to take a moment to give both Rep. Davids and Rep. Peltola just an opportunity to thank you so much for being on this show and for being that voice for Native American representation. I have a tradition that I present my coin on behalf of Hawaii's 2nd Congressional District to both of my colleagues.
Thank you.
Want to wish all of you a happy holidays and a mele kalikimaka. And to everyone watching this from Hawaii and Alaska and Kansas, I wish you a happy holidays, and thanks so much for joining me.
Thank you
really
so much.
appreciate it.
Alusistach Chikina. Merry Christmas.
Merry Christmas. Aloha.